Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to give folks another minute or two to get signed in. If you're seeing the screen and you are hearing me, then you're in the right spot. Please feel free to take a moment to find your chat window. We'd like to use the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And take a moment to just change the setting on your chat so that everybody gets to see, to all panelists and attendees, so that everybody can see your responses. That's, if indeed that's what you'd like. But everybody likes to see where you're from, who you are. We like to use the chat window. Thanks again to change your settings in the chat so it says all panelists and attendees. It's just a little drop down. If that's indeed where you're coming in from. Okay, so I'm going to do a slow start. I'm Dr. Jeff Soloway. I'm the founder and chief training officer here at MindWell-U. Delighted to welcome you to one of MindWell-U's webinars. MindWell-U offers evidence-based training in mindfulness to organizations across the country. We offer this monthly webinars as a knowledge translation, as well as we conduct research in the field of mindfulness in the workplace. So we are delighted today to be talking about mindfulness in action for entrepreneurs and business leaders. It's an important topic. How to build a business without burning out, a very real issue here. And welcome to everybody across Canada, into the United States, as well as from India. That's exciting when we're going global like that. We are going to engage you in conversation through the chat. So if that's something you'd like to participate in, we'd appreciate that. So know where your chat is. We're also going to put in some poll questions, and a poll question will pop up from time to time like this one. Have you participated in the MindWell Challenge? So if you see that question pop up, you can answer it. The MindWell Challenge is MindWell's core online training program that we offer to organizations. And we see that a number of you have engaged in it. A number of you are new, so maybe you'll have a chance to sign up for that, at least the mini at the end of the session today. As well as if you do have questions, we really encourage you to post the questions into the chat as we go through our conversation today. We want to answer your questions. We want to make it as relevant as possible, and I will do my best with our team here at MindWell to get your questions answered. If I can't do it during the conversation, I'm going to hold it towards the end. Great. Before we launch in, I want to guide us on a mindfulness practice. And we're going to make our whole experience together a mindfulness practice. And whether you're an experienced meditator or brand new to mindfulness, we're going to make this work for you. Okay, I'm going to start by asking you, do you have a cup or a glass nearby? Maybe you have some water, maybe you have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. I'm going to ask you to get your glass, bring it into your hand. If you don't, that's okay. Maybe it's just grabbing anything, a pen that's close by. The purpose is just to bring your full attention into the felt sense of the pen or the cup in your hand. Maybe it's something to eat, a piece of orange, an apple. We're going to slow down by bringing our attention into our hands here and what we're holding. We can get so busy and caught up. We're just going to slow down and learn how we can move our attention. Right now, we're moving our attention into our hands and the sensations in our hands holding the cup. And maybe if it's a food or a drink, we can smell it, see what the smell is like. Take a moment to just tune into the sense of smell. And when you're ready, have a taste of your drink. Just really enjoying and focusing in on that taste. So just coming back into our senses. That's a big proponent of mindfulness, just coming back into the sense doors: taste, touch, hearing, seeing, smelling. And now coming back into our bodies here and feeling the sensations of our feet on the floor. Notice our feet are making contact with the floor and our bum is on the chair. Lift and lengthen up through the spine. Right, roll back the shoulders. Maybe roll back the shoulders again. Shoulders have a tendency of coming forward, hunching forward in our computers. So rolling back the shoulders, lifting and lengthening up through the spine, bringing the head to the top of the spine. Ears in alignment with the shoulders, with the chin moving back. And just feel the body sitting. Again, tuning out all the other distractions. You can close your eyes if you like for just a couple moments so that you can really access the felt sense of the body here. Maybe feeling the breath moving into the body, maybe the belly moving in and out. Chest rising and falling as best as you can, bringing your attention out of the thinking mind, which is where we spend most of our time, and into the sensing mind, sensing what's here present in our bodies, sensing our breath moving in and out. Just taking one more deep breath in and a deep breath out. And as we go through our webinar together today, we will keep on coming back into our bodies, keep on coming back into our breath. Invite you to close out any other windows that you might have open so the tendency to get distracted or multitask doesn't come up. And bringing our full attention here. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Jordan Friesen to join us here. Jordan is the National Director of Workplace Mental Health at the Canadian Mental Health Association. Jordan, thank you very much for joining us. This is our second webinar this month. And we had a great first webinar a couple weeks back, and thank you for joining us again.
Happy to be here. We're on a bit of a roll.
And we're delighted to be supporting a different focus this time around, mindfulness in action for entrepreneurs and business leaders. How to build a business without burning out. I guess I'm curious to start. I know that the Canadian Mental Health Association, they did a research study, which we're going to get more into. What led to that? What was the impetus for going into this area?
Well, I think what we wanted to understand in a better way are really the mental health challenges and needs of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, small businesses form such a huge segment of our workforce in Canada, but we really don't know a lot about what their experience is with their mental health. We also assumed that, given what we know about entrepreneurship, that it's likely a stressful experience and that there are challenges that come up with respect to mental health. And so, the first step for us in terms of identifying possible solutions and supports for entrepreneurs is really about understanding the scope of the challenge first. And so that was really the genesis of our study. And we were fortunate enough to have support from BDC, which is a financial institution in Canada that's dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs. And so with that, we were able to survey a chunk of entrepreneurs across Canada, a range from very small startups, less than 10 people, all the way to, businesses that are emerging with, multi-million-dollar revenue streams. So I think we got a good sense of, what the challenges are with respect to mental health with being an entrepreneur, but also how entrepreneurs are taking care of themselves and maybe ways in which they aren't, but could. So, I think my hope today, Jeff, between you and I, is I'll share a lot of information from the study, and I really do feel that mindfulness for entrepreneurs is a really promising approach, because there's a lot going on if you're running a business, and taking the time to actually press pause and focus on I guess, the present moment. I really do feel that it's a valuable skill for entrepreneurs and business leaders. So really curious to hear some of your insights today as well.
Thanks, Jordan. And I'm going to do my best to share both my experience and strategies that we use at MindWell. And intention here is that people will be able to walk away with some new tips, tricks, and even some training, access to training that they can follow up with.
Perfect.
Great. Well, let's dive into that study because I think it's a great, really interesting study. It's got all this data. So why don't you start walking us through the study? And I know we've got a couple slides that I can pull up.
Yeah, sure. So this was back in early 2019. So it's just about a year ago now. And so here's a copy of the cover of the report. We call it "Going It Alone." And really, what we heard from entrepreneurs was that oftentimes felt like the experience. And it's a common expression that we use, but really encapsulates I guess, the experience of entrepreneurship. And many times it is lonely. And so what we did is we surveyed about 500 entrepreneurs across Canada, like I said, a whole range of sizes of business. We also followed up with some qualitative interviews as well. And we asked them a couple really key areas of questions. One, how do you experience your mental health? Two, what are the impacts of entrepreneurship on your mental health? And then vice versa. How do challenges with your mental health impact your ability to work and to run your business? And then we asked them also, in what ways do you cope successfully, or in what coping strategies do you use, and how do you manage the stress that you experience as an entrepreneur? So we really wanted to understand what they were doing as well. And so there's a couple of key findings, but the main one is this. Thank you, Jeff. You're reading my mind here. So in general, what we found, and this is not surprising if you're an entrepreneur, is that mental health problems are common in business leaders and entrepreneurs. So you see there on the screen, for example, about 2/3 feel depressed at least or more than once a week. Half have experienced a mental health problem, but fewer actually want to seek support from professionals for their mental health. So, what we see is that, this is, in terms of experiencing mental health problems over the course of, a given year, entrepreneurs and business leaders at least told us that they experience those problems more than double the rate of the general population. And so what this told us right at the outset is that there's a huge need here. And that entrepreneurs are certainly experiencing a higher incidence of mental health problems. They're likely more at risk for developing mental illnesses, and that these problems are impacting their lives in significant ways. So as the Canadian Mental Health Association, Canada's oldest, largest mental health charity, we see it really as our job to be able to identify and provide appropriate supports for entrepreneurs, because they form such a critical part of our country and our country's economy.
And in case many of or many of these entrepreneurs haven't had a chance to take the Not Myself Today program, can you help just further describe maybe some of the distinctions when you say mental health problems versus mental illness? Because I love the
Yeah.
way you.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. That's good. So a mental health problem, I guess you can think of your mental health in the same way you think of your physical health, right? So we all have physical health to some degree. If our physical health bar was 0, we'd be dead. And it's the same thing for our mental health, right? We all have mental health to some degree. And sometimes our mental health is better than other times. And so we see mental health problems as those things that adversely impact our mental health. So push our mental health bar down. Mental illness is slightly different. It's sort of when it's something that's diagnosed by a doctor. It has specific criteria, and so you may be experiencing challenges with your mental health, but not necessarily be diagnosed with an illness. And so there's a little bit of differentiation between the two. So illness is a medical condition diagnosed by a doctor. Mental health problems really describe a lot of those ups and downs that we all experience with our mental health over the course of our lifetime. Sometimes they can become really severe, and in which case it's often labeled with some sort of a diagnosis that calls it an illness.
Thanks, Jordan. And I think it's worth, we kind of talked right before we went live just about how it's a difficult population to even get onto this program and
Mhm.
just to sign up, because the propensity is maybe for entrepreneurs or business leaders to be really busy and not make the time for something like this. So I like to say that if you're here listening part of this session, then you're already taking a huge step forward. And this might be the most important 60 minutes that you spent to increasing your financial wellness in your organization. It
Agreed.
could be. So
Agreed. That's exactly it. I mean, this is hopefully the start of something for you as an entrepreneur and really focusing in on your own mental health because it is so critical to your success over the long term.
let's
Perfect.
like to speak to this slide.
Yeah, sure. So the next slide, and maybe we'll jump to the poll first. So really what we want to understand, part of was what was stressing entrepreneurs out, because we know that stress over time can lead to problems with your mental health. Chronic or acute stress is one of those things that is often not good for us. There's different kinds of stress. So I'll say that some stress is good, but too much stress can be a bad thing. So here's a poll question. Be interested to see what our audience says. But as an entrepreneur or business leader, what's the most stressful thing about your job? And then we can compare that to some of the findings here. So take a minute, and if you can just let us know, I'd love to see what this group says is the most stressful thing about being an entrepreneur.
I'm going to share it with everybody here. Do you see that, Jordan?
Okay, yeah, got it. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this group's actually a little bit different from our national sample, so that's interesting. So many of you said time management, people management, work-life balance, and then financial management. So it's interesting that the entrepreneurs that we actually surveyed said that the most stressful thing about running a business was actually the financial piece of it, so cash flow. Um, so trying to keep the doors open in a really concrete way. But second to that was actually balancing work and family responsibilities, so work-life balance. So and I think if you're an entrepreneur or business leader, you can certainly understand this. You're wearing so many hats, and there's so many things that need to get done, and often they fall to you. Um, and so that work-life balance can be a huge challenge. And so it's one of the things that primarily stressed entrepreneurs out the most. Other things, as you can see here, high self-expectations. So there's an opportunity to think about that I think from a mindfulness perspective and an acceptance perspective. Finding the right people, decision-making, and then time management was down there as well. So, I think that all that to say that there's a lot of different stressors, but some of the primary ones around work-life balance and expectations of ourselves are actually things that are to some degree within our control. And so it's an important area to think about from an intervention perspective is how can we actually encourage entrepreneurs to take control over those things in ways that are going to be helpful for managing their stress and improving their mental health. Jeff, I'm not sure what your thoughts are as you look at this. I know you're an entrepreneur. How does this resonate with your experience?
Yeah, and I did have a number of strategies that I was going to share a little later on. But one thing that is just striking as I look at this graph, which is around cash flow,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something that all entrepreneurs I could understand how it's the number one, and just making sure that cash is coming in and you've got enough to pay the bills and employees and things like that, um, and having uncertainty around that,
Mm-hmm.
and then having anxiety around that. And I think I don't have any magic way to make that stress go away.
No.
But I think that there's one reality that is probably true too, that this situation or this stress probably isn't going to go away anytime soon. We can probably guarantee that this is going to be for many entrepreneurs, it's probably going to still be here in 6 months or a year, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe longer. And so when we start to look at it this way, and we start to recognize this type of stressor is not going away, then we can start to build in that level of acceptance of it, and start to say, okay, well, if this stressor is going to be here, what else can I do in my life?
Exactly.
Because I know I need to build some other positive coping mechanisms to
Mm-hmm.
mitigate that stress.
That's exactly it, right? And I think if this stressor isn't going away, what are the other stressors that you can take more proactive action on, right, to help reduce. So I think that's the other piece of it, is that it's often the severity of any one source of stress, but also having multiple different sources of stress can be equally challenging. So as entrepreneurs, if there's an area of stress that you can't control, right, certainly the approach is around acceptance and how can I become more comfortable with that stress in my life, and learn to accept it. But for the other areas of stress that are in your control, how can we actually take action to change how stressful they are and change their impact on our life? I think it's a real opportunity for entrepreneurs to think about how to do those things.
And within today's climate, there's this notion of uncertainty comes up quite a bit, right? And not knowing what's next. And I think that's similar to this continual trigger of cash flow and the stress of that. And the other, with the life of an entrepreneur is quite uncertain. And so there's constantly this uncertainty about what's going to happen next. And there's been interesting research around mindfulness starting to show how it helps us cope with uncertainty and builds our what's known as a tolerance of uncertainty. And I think it's part of resilience, but we want to be building up our tolerance for uncertainty. And it builds agility, and that's kind of closely related with our ability to adapt and change and be agile. And these are all kind of qualities or characteristics of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely, yes.
And so mindfulness is helping us. This practice of mindfulness does help us to build our tolerance for uncertainty, because part of it is an underlying premise of mindfulness is impermanence. It's recognizing this truism of impermanence, that the world and life and reality itself is constantly changing. Nothing is static. It seems static and it seems physical and hard, but it's actually constantly in flux. And just like the laws of thermodynamics, like energy is constantly changing, and it's never static. And we come to see that and experience that a bit more clearly in a mindfulness practice, and even a practice of sitting. Like if you do like a mindful sitting practice and you're just sitting for 5 minutes, you start to see how experience is constantly changing. Your breath is always changing. Sounds are always arising and falling away. Nothing is still. Nothing is still. The world is always changing. And we start to realize this with our practice. And we start to realize how our minds are so busy in our practice as well. So there is a notion of building up this tolerance for uncertainty that comes with a mindfulness practice.
I would agree completely. I think that higher tolerance for uncertainty is going to, like you said, allow entrepreneurs and business owners to carefully weigh and consider decisions more effectively. It's going to give them the space to think creatively. It's going to be more about responding intelligently rather than reacting to the circumstances around them. So wholeheartedly agree. That ability to tolerate uncertainty is key, and it's not an easy thing to develop. I know I struggle with it myself.
Yeah, and it's kind of a bizarre thing to even consider developing. It's like, well, how do you develop tolerance for uncertainty, right? It's like it's like where's the manual for that?
Exactly. I imagine it's the same way. It's a similar thinking around how do you develop more patience. There's only one way to do it, is to have it be tested.
Exactly. But there is like patience. It's hysterical, because mindfulness practice is an act of patience. It is a practice of patience. It's like you want to develop the skills of playing the piano. You have to play the piano. You have to put the time in at the bench and play the piano.
Totally.
Right? You want to be able to run a marathon. Well, you gotta run like first a mile and then two. Right? Like you got to put in the time practicing. If you want to build patience, then one way to do it, although it's very difficult for human beings, is sitting and being kind of more still and silent, and building the practice of staying with your attention moment to moment. And that's the practice of mindfulness. Like that's a formal mindfulness practice where you're maybe sitting still for 5 to 10 minutes And the mind is wanting to stand up and wanting to go do this, just like you're watching this webinar right now and you're like getting dings on your phone and emails are coming in and you're getting pulled into other directions. But your ability to self-regulate, your ability to let go of certain thoughts and say, no, I'm not going to pay attention to that, and come back into the present moment and stay with your breathing if you're doing a mindfulness practice, or stay with this webinar because this is your intention for the next,
Hmm.
45 minutes. That is your practice of practicing patience, your ability to recognize what's happening inside of yourself and to let go from things that you don't want to pay attention to, and come back to your formal intent. So that's why three key parts of mindfulness practice is the intention, your attention, and your attitude. So what's
Mm.
your intention over the next, hour? um, how can you continually bring your attention back to that, and the mind is going to wander away, especially for business leaders and entrepreneurs, which have a lot of things going on. The mind is going to wander and it needs to stay focused and bring it back. And then the attitude is, how do we do that? Like, can we actually bring ourselves back into the present moment to our chosen attention, with a sense of non-judgment,
Hmm.
without kind of criticizing ourselves or others, uh, and a sense of patience.
Hmm.
So there are ways of practicing patience and tolerance of uncertainty, and that's what I find most exciting about mindfulness practice, because it does give us a more of a formal training regimen, for our
I
mental
love it.
mental wellness.
Yeah, and I think for entrepreneurs too, that they're goal-oriented people, right? They're used to making a plan and executing, and they're used to putting in the work. So if we talk about mindfulness as a practice, I think it makes a lot of sense. Is that it's something that you build into your routine, you build into your day. It becomes a part of how you work and how you do life. And that I hope is something that resonates to entrepreneurs and business leaders, who take a strong sense of ownership over the work they do, and over the habits and skills that they're developing to be able to do that work most effectively.
Agreed. Well, I feel like we're going to keep coming back to these types of stressors
Hmm.
as we continue the conversation, but I'm curious about what, maybe we'll move on to the next
Yeah.
slides.
Yeah, sounds good. So this is the answer to the question of how entrepreneurs cope with the stress that they experience. And so what we saw, that largely what entrepreneurs rely on are individual or personal coping mechanisms, right? So they rely on themselves primarily to cope with stress, which again is it fits the picture of an entrepreneur or a business leader quite well. They take time out, time away from work. They exercise. They disconnect. Take time through vacation. Different ways of practicing self-care. And what's interesting to me is that very few entrepreneurs indicated that they would either seek professional help or seek help online or through any sort of virtual means, which we had assumed might actually be, the most accessible ways for entrepreneurs to seek help for their mental health, was through those sort of virtual interventions, because they're so busy. But what we really heard was that entrepreneurs really rely on themselves to manage their stress, and because they're so used to being self-reliant, I suspect, they have a tendency to lean on what they can do personally to manage their stress. And again, that's why I think giving entrepreneurs better evidence-based tools to help them manage their mental health and cope with the stress that they experience is so important. So Jeff, I know that, and you mentioned before we got online today that exercise was actually a part of how you developed effective coping mechanisms to stress. I'm wondering, out of all of these, do any of them resonate with you in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yes, it's true. Exercise was a big part for me, and the last. It's interesting because I never really considered myself an entrepreneur in a lot of ways, but here I am as an entrepreneur running a small business, mindfulness-based business in Canada, and my background was more in content and expert in mindfulness content. I did a PhD in the area of mindfulness and education. trying to bring it to as a form of professional development with teachers and healthcare workers and leaders and in the workplace. But now I found myself, working and growing a business more and more. That's how I spend most of my day, talking about, marketing and sales and
Hmm.
content development is not as much, although that's my sweet spot. It's not what I get to do most of the time. So it's definitely pushed me in different areas, and it's definitely
Hmm.
brought up a ton of stress for me, needing to meet these financial obligations. And I think we all know what it's like to start up a new business and the challenges financially around that, and then work with other folks and grow a team. And so my own, I used to describe myself as I used to be a pretty good meditator.
Hmm.
I would be able to go on meditation retreat. I went on quite a few meditation retreats, 7-day retreats, 10-day retreat. I even did a 30-day retreat at one point in time, like a
Wow.
silent retreat at the Insight Meditation Society, which is a big retreat center. And I'm not saying that we need to go do this, but I had time in my life to do that. Um, and another tool that I had in my tool belt was yoga, practice of hatha yoga. I spent time learning yoga when I was first in university, and I spent time at an ashram in BC learning yoga and becoming a yoga teacher. So I had these tools, and I practiced meditation quite a bit. And then I started into this, more deeply into an entrepreneur and starting a business. And my habits, these positive coping mechanisms, started to fall away. And then I also had a family and a young
Hmm.
family. I had two young kids, and not sleeping as much and crying, and all of trying to regulate
Hmm.
myself with them. And that was a lot. And I started um, to suffer, and the stress built up, and it manifested in anxiety for me, and just more and more, just feeling more anxious on a regular basis. And it's easy to get caught up in that anxiety and where that could take me, and where it would take my attention, and the quality of my attention, and the quality of the thoughts that would come up. And I think that's a really important reminder, for us as business leaders and entrepreneurs, is that when we're stressed, we aren't necessarily thinking clearly. We're thinking with a negative bias. We're thinking with a stressed brain, and a stressed brain actually thinks differently. The type of thoughts that we come up with, has a negative bias to it, and there's a lot of science to show that when the amygdala, part of the limbic system, is activated, it actually creates these thoughts which are threat relevant. So
Hmm.
it makes us see things with these glasses which might be more negative. And so we can imagine, if we look at our business from a lens of a more negative slant, or the what ifs, um, then it could just breed more stress and anxiety. So it's an important reminder to recognize, how are we feeling today? Are we really seeing clearly our business today in order to evaluate it and make good decisions? And is our
Hmm.
brain kind of ready to be in that positive space to see? So that's why we like to define mindfulness as the ability to see clearly so that we can respond effectively. Mindfulness is the ability to see clearly what's happening so that we can respond effectively. And
And
for myself, part of my journey was coming back. So I used to be a really good meditator. Then I got more into mindfulness in action, being able to uh, embody mindfulness more in my everyday life, like being with my kids, or when I was trying to do something at work versus doing long meditation, because
hmm.
I didn't feel like I had the time for it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And part of coming back into it was exercise. And a big thing that I want to emphasize here for people is having a buddy to exercise with. For me, it was a huge thing to have a buddy, a workout buddy. And whether that's a physical workout buddy or a mental workout buddy, I really encourage that as somebody to be accountable to. And it's not a new idea. I think it's an old idea that you can, having somebody to be accountable to
It
really
is.
has a benefit for us. But I think that having a workout buddy can really make a difference in our life.
Mhm. Two points I think that I want to just build on there, Jeff. One is the what you said around mindfulness giving you the clarity to respond effectively, and I think there's a huge difference between responding, and reacting, and that's a lot of what we talk about at CMHA when we talk about these things related to emotional regulation or automatic negative thoughts, and how a stressed brain, like you said, isn't actually thinking clearly. Um, that space between reaction and response is really critical, and so whether it's whether it's mindfulness practices, whether it's other habits that you're able to cultivate, but giving yourself the space between something happening and you responding is so critical. And because, like you said, often our first reaction isn't necessarily the response we want. It's the response that our amygdala is telling us. So for entrepreneurs, identifying maybe when your brain is thinking with those negative lenses is very critical. And again, choosing to respond rather than to react. And then the second piece I was going to build off of from what you said, I actually don't remember, Jeff.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. It'll come back. Yeah.
We did have a question from the audience, and I'll put it out. I'm going to encourage everybody, if you do have questions, please put them out there. We're happy to try and answer them. Jordan, could one of the reasons they don't access professional help be due to lack of workplace benefits like EFAP and higher costs of professional help in the community?
Yep, absolutely, yes. That was one of the, well, there were a couple main reasons we saw that entrepreneurs didn't access help. One was cost, certainly, and that entrepreneurs don't typically have, especially in the early stages, may not have access to benefits, EFAP, for example. So cost is certainly a barrier. And some of the other reasons that they identified, though, were stigma related. So entrepreneurs don't necessarily want to be seen as seeking support for their mental health because it feels like it sort of gives a negative perception to the rest of the entrepreneurial community. And that's fair in some ways. I mean, entrepreneurship is highly competitive, especially when you talk about entrepreneurs that are seeking capital, right? I think there's this idea that an entrepreneur needs to be sort of this relentless, fearless, undeterrable force. And we know that's not the case, right? We know we're all humans. But yeah, it was certainly cost and accessibility of supports and services, but then also stigma was a huge piece for entrepreneurs. And so, part of our mission is really to get entrepreneurs talking about their mental health more. And if professional supports aren't where they want to go, where else can they go? That's not just themselves, right? So the last thing we want to be doing for any entrepreneur, any busy business leader, is adding something else to their to-do list to say, not only do you need to do everything you need to do with your life, but here are 15 things that you also need to do to look after your mental health, and they are your responsibility. That's a huge weight to carry. And so when we think about how entrepreneurs can be best supported with their mental health, we think that, and I think there's some initial support around the idea that entrepreneurs could do a better job of actually supporting each other. There's a huge sense of community within entrepreneurs. And if we're able to start conversations about mental health in the same way that we would start conversations about how to solve a cash flow problem, there could be a much different entrepreneurial environment in Canada, and that would certainly be part of our hope as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you for answering that. I want to continue moving along because I think it's going to start getting into a few more suggestions and strategies for entrepreneurs. I know one of the stats that I saw was 90% of men and 80% of women entrepreneurs thought of work while at home, and that work interfered with their ability to enjoy their home lives. Pretty big statistic. What can we do about this?
Well, I think like you said, Jeff, accountability in some respects can be a helpful strategy here. But Work-life balance is critical for our psychological well-being. You can't be your best at work if you're not taking time away from work. We know that in many respects. So I think entrepreneurs can be a little bit more intentional about setting those boundaries in their lives around what is work time and what is not work time. And the notion of having somebody help you be accountable to that can be really helpful. And whether that's a friend or a fellow entrepreneur or a spouse or family member, all those things could be helpful in terms of mitigating some of that imbalance that most entrepreneurs experience. But again, it's something that takes practice.
Yeah, it does. It does take practice, and it's something that even I, and in today's circumstance is even more challenging, right? Because the blending of the personal and the professional, um, exactly. There's very difficult to experience these boundaries.
Hmm.
And so there are some strategies that we can employ. And something that we talk about at Mindwell is utilizing Take Five, in transitions. So recognizing transitions. When are you at home? When are you at work? And there's no hard, fast, wall that you can't separate. But you can be more intentional about when you're at work, even if you're at work in your home office, and then when you transition back into, walk out your door into your living room, if you do a Take Five. So you're kind of closing the door on work for this moment, for this time period, and then shifting back. And when I say Take Five, it could be one of these tools of Take Five, like just taking 5 breaths, just grounding your attention, being intentional about, all right, I'm closing off work now, I'm heading back into home, and recognizing like there's a whole different thought stream and emotional
Hmm.
stream as soon as you walk into home. And another, so that's one, is noticing transitions and being intentional about the transitions. Another thing I would say is recognizing when we're getting caught up in triggers. So I've had the experience many times where I'm in my living room having a conversation with my family, talking to my kids, and then I have a thought from work come up and it triggers me. It
Hmm.
stresses me out, and I take it out on my family. It makes me short in my response to my kids or my wife, and something like that. And you know it I can see that it was triggered because of a stressor from work. And so I think that this can happen a lot of the time, and we need to start to recognize our own triggers, our own stressors, and seeing when they're coming up, and in these other contexts. And
Hmm.
we can't blame ourselves for having these things happen to us. Like, we're human. Our mind is constantly working, and it's not doesn't have these boundaries. Like, oh, Jeff's at home now, he shouldn't be thinking about work. Like,
Wouldn't
he,
that be nice, eh?
yeah, yeah, really, guys. But
Yeah,
it,
well, I love the idea of noticing transitions, and something I talk about even with my team, and I practice myself is identifying what's that act or what's that thing that signifies the end of your work, right? And for some of us, it might be walking out of our home office. For some of us, it might be closing our laptop, whatever it is. But focus in on that and be really intentional about it, right? And say, this signifies I am done, right? And try to practice it. So whether it's closing your laptop, and maybe you need to shove it away in a drawer, and that's how you can maintain that balance and that boundary, whatever it takes. But it should be an act, right? It brings it into something more concrete.
yeah, and a big takeaway that I hope people will hear is that the small is big. Small
Mhm.
actions make a big difference here. And it could be such a small thing like having that cue for yourself, the cue in yourself when you close your laptop, when you maybe clean your desk before moving back into your home life. But having some act has a big difference. So these don't have to be major widespread changes. Often we
Mhm.
see little changes having a big impact. Um,
Absolutely.
we've just one other aspect that I'll mention is getting off thought trains. And it's a core practice that we teach on core content on the MindWell challenge, and you'll get access to it on the mini challenges. This notion of thought trains about specifically about no time. So we often have this idea that we don't have time in our days, and we believe that. We believe that we don't have time, and we invest a lot of our attention in that thought. So we need to investigate these underlying thoughts that we're having about our businesses, about our time, about our, maybe it's about our finances, and just recognize, is there really truth to that? And sometimes these thoughts are very repetitive and they come up, you know, tens and 20 and hundreds of times in a day. And they're the root source of our problems. And we can get better at seeing our thoughts without getting entangled in them. And that's a real power of mindfulness practice, because when you sit for 5 minutes and breathing, and essentially you're doing nothing when you're doing mindfulness practice, you don't have to do anything. But what you become very clear about is, wow, I have a busy mind, and wow, that thought about my financials and where that money is going to come from, that's come up. I'm just sitting here trying to focus on my breathing, and I've had that thought 10 times come up. And so now you can start to see how it's affecting you, and we can be intentional about letting these thoughts go. We don't have to do
Exactly.
anything to them, but we're just redirecting our attention back to our breathing, and that starts to uncouple
Mhm.
the strength or the hold that these thoughts have on us. And
Yeah.
that's again the power of mindfulness practice.
Thoughts are just information, right? They're just flowing through our brain. We can choose what we want to do with them. So I agree. It's about uncoupling, the automatic thoughts that we have, or the thought trains that we're on, from necessarily driving our actions all the time. It's a great point, Jeff.
It's easier said than done, much easier said than done. And that's why mindfulness is not an easy practice, but that's also why it's a very beneficial practice, and there's a lot of science to show the benefits of it, right? So it's not an easy thing. It does take practice, it does take some guidance, but you can get better at it. And it's no different than like your mental workout. It's you
Hmm.
got to do your mental workout. And I think it's important to understand it as mental fitness. And another message around mindfulness practice, that it doesn't have to be a big um, big personal journey around uncovering, your deep dark secrets. Mindfulness practice has a continuum, and we can really look at it on a basic level of mental fitness.
Hmm.
It's like you want to hit the gym, you want to do 10 minutes of just strengthening your muscle of attention, because your quality of attention, it has a huge impact on everything you do in your daily life, right? Like every activity, every task that you're doing and focusing on your business requires attention. And if you can strengthen that muscle of attention, then you're going to be deeper into whatever task you're doing. And so
Hmm.
mindfulness practice, 10 minutes of attention training, think about it as attention training at the beginning of your day or in the middle of your day, is going to have a benefit for the remainder of your time after that. So it
Got it.
doesn't have to be this intensive reflective exercise
Hmm.
into your past and deep emotions. You'll get there if you want to get there.
Yeah.
Mindfulness runs deep, and it can go into a lot of depth and of experience and practice. But on a basic level, it's just about starting to regulate our attention and help us be more present in everyday life.
Yeah, we talk, when I talk about it, I use the words train your brain, right? In the same way you would train the muscles in your body. I mean, the brain is an incredible tool, and it does so much for us, but there's so many ways we can be more intentional about training the different, cognitive and emotional functions that we have that make us, great human beings. And I agree, mindfulness is an excellent practice to do that.
So I'm recognizing our time here. We've got just under 10 minutes left. Thank you for continuing to be with us. Just recognizing our audience. If you do have questions that you have for us, resonating with things that we're saying, or specific questions that are coming up for you as a business leader or entrepreneur, we're happy to hear your comments or your questions, and post them now through the chat window. I'm wondering, Jordan, if there's I'm going to come back to our slides and see if there's a couple more
Hmm.
we can come back to.
Yeah, this last one was just, and we were talking. I guess the hope is to touch on burnout a little bit, and to understand that entrepreneurs certainly do experience burnout. We had about a third of entrepreneurs in our study indicate that burnout as something that they've experienced as a result of their entrepreneurial journey. The other things, though, I want to highlight, they reported a whole bunch of other physical and mental health impacts, but all of these could potentially actually be elements of that experience of burnout as well. So, the rate of burnout might in fact be much higher, and that has a huge impact on entrepreneurs. It disengages them from their business. It affects their self-confidence and self-efficacy, and can have really long-lasting impacts, unfortunately. So all that to say that we certainly recognize that burnout is an issue, and we want to make sure that entrepreneurs are thinking about and thinking about how to prevent that type of burnout. So things like setting realistic goals, celebrating achievement. I know sometimes we're not very good at that. Enforcing limits on your own productivity. So remembering that the journey of building a business is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And then in particular, we see a lot of value around social support and connections, specifically with other entrepreneurs. And again, separate from necessarily a business agenda, but actually just talking about, as an entrepreneur, how do they cope with what they're experiencing and trying to run and grow their business.
Thanks, Jordan. We've had a couple questions come up here from audience members that I want to read out. And what about unhealthy ways of coping? For example, substance abuse. Was that identified and or considered? No doubt we have a lot of unhealthy ways of coping with our mental health. Do you want to start?
Yep. Yeah. So as far as the study goes, we didn't necessarily go there. We felt that we wanted to talk to entrepreneurs about the ways in which they're coping that are healthy behaviors. We know that entrepreneurs are coping in other ways as well. We know that issues of substance use can be problematic. We know that working excessive hours is another common method of coping for entrepreneurs. I would just say that as a business leader and entrepreneur, I don't like to talk about good coping and bad coping, because I firmly believe that we're all learning all the time, and there's the essence of right or wrong doesn't really add anything aside from judgment. But I'd encourage you to think about healthy versus unhealthy coping habits, and is the way you're coping helping your overall health and well-being over the long term, this marathon we're in, or is it something that's just making you feel better in the moment? And certainly lean in towards some of those longer term coping strategies. That would be my full endorsement. And again, all of those things take practice.
Yeah, I love that, Jordan. We talk about proactive versus maladaptive coping, or positive and negative coping. And I really suggest I echo that. And instead of saying like what you shouldn't be doing, I talk about what you should be doing. And it's if you're leaning on some crutches to get you through a tough day or a tough week, or that's just your patterns, let that continue to be there, but try and add in something else. Try and add in exercise or mindfulness practice or sleep and connecting with others. I think it's about building out a holistic lifestyle that's going to balance you out. And so I think that's an important message to us, is that it's not about shaming ourselves or wronging ourselves for things in our lives. It's about adding positive things and let them coexist. And you'll see for yourself how one feels and one impacts you on the long term.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So add in those positive things, and over time you'll experience the benefit of them, and very likely you'll just naturally shift your focus towards those proactive ways of coping.
A couple more questions. There's a question about time in the day to meditate, whether morning was the best. Sorry, I want to just pull that up. I think one of the biggest reasons why morning might be the best time to do it is to ensure that it gets done. Because if you do it in the morning, then you often make the time. You're not distracted by as many things. Sometimes it's harder to build it into your day once the ship has got started in a direction and you get really busy. So ensure it gets done. Get her done in the morning. but it can be just as effective in the middle of the day, during that transition, but after work, coming back home, calming. That's a great transition. Before bed, we haven't even talked about sleep, and no doubt sleep is impacted by all of this. And doing it before bed, helping calm the mind, the busy mind before bed, I'm sure is something that would be valuable skill for a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders, so that they get a good restful sleep. And sleep is so important for our health and mental health. And
Mhm. Couldn't agree more. I know Louise had a quick question. When was this data collected, and would it be different now in the context of our global pandemic? This was collected in 2019, in spring of 2019. So absolutely, yes, the picture would likely be different. Knowing what we know from Canadians, generally speaking, they're experiencing higher levels of anxiety, poorer mental health across the board. And I expect that cash flow would be an increasingly big challenge for entrepreneurs now too. So yeah, certainly this is not business as usual for the entrepreneurial community. And I have no doubt that they're experiencing the effects of it, unfortunately.
there was a question about, did the report show any positive relationships with mental health? Do they score high on resilience? For example, like, does having control over your own business and work schedule have positive mental health impacts?
Mm-hmm.
Hear this from many
Yeah,
entrepreneurs.
that's a great question, and yeah, I mean, when we talk about what adds or takes away from stress in the context of work, it's it's control, it's level of demand, it's how rewarded you are for the work you do, and certainly thinking about running your own business, there's a lot of elements of control, of reward that are actually stress reducers and stress buffers, which is great. I think that unfortunately, even though there are some of those positive attributes largely across the board based on what we saw, the negative impacts of running a business on your mental health tend to be more prevalent. So while there certainly are positives, I think it's about trying to find a way to mitigate some of the negative impacts so that we can actually amplify those positive things and make entrepreneurship a really desirable career path for Canadians, because it's the foundation of our economy.
There's a couple kind of last points that I just wanted to put in there, Jordan. One is about just checks and balances. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders understand this notion of balancing the books and getting out of the red. And we can look at our own lives like that. We need to invest in our own lives. Money can't always be going out. We need to bring money in, and energy can't always be going out into the business. We need to be bringing money and investing energy into ourselves for sustainability. And it feels really difficult to do that. It really does. When you're in the midst of it, I know from personal experience, it took me years to really kind of pull myself out of that and to realize it, and to really continue to commit to more positive coping mechanisms in my life. But I think most entrepreneurs and business leaders could understand this notion of balancing their books, and we need to invest in ourselves in order to be our best selves. And I was watching, there's a popular Netflix show these days on Michael Jordan and The Last Dance, and many people might have seen it. And it's about his journey about winning the championships. And at the last episode talks all about his ability to be present and be present. And what made him the greatest was his focus in the present moment, and not thinking about missing shots that he hasn't yet taken. That's what he talked about. And just amazing for them to talk about being mindful with Michael Jordan right at the end of, like, that's the culmination of that episode, or was really cool.
Amazing.
So we do have a couple links where we want to invite you to take the MindWell mini challenge here. You can sign up in the link, app.mindwellu.com, free. I didn't get to talk about multitasking, but we do have a great article on multitasking, and maybe Amanda can find the link to that and share that with you, because that's a great article that I think a lot will identify with a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs. We also have upcoming webinars that we want to share with you. And if you'd like to sign up, we've got another one coming up next month that you're welcome to join us with. We'll put a link. For you to sign up right there. And we're a bit rushed here at the end, but this has been a great collaboration with Jordan and his team at the CMHA, and bringing this to so many Canadians, and even outside of Canada. And so we're grateful for this partnership to get the message out. And this is a great study that you guys did. And shout out to everybody on your team who helped to promote this. Shout out to everybody on MindWell's team to help get it out there. Likewise. So that people got the benefit.
Absolutely. And for those of you that asked, we'll make sure to include a link to this study in the follow-up email so you can all go take a look at all the data yourselves.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I think we've used up your hour. We hope it was valuable, and we hope you can take one kernel back with you and integrate it into your day and take advantage of the mini MindWell challenge. Thank you. Thanks for all your kind words here. And we'll look forward to staying connected and supporting one another. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.